I am Krishnakumar, Associate Professor of Commerce from Department of Commerce, St.Joseph's College of Arts and Science, Autonomous, Cuddalore, going to give an overview of the GST. You know, in India, the GST will play a major role in all aspects of the human activities by way of rendering services as well as in the point of purchasing goods and wherever they have availed the services. So in this way the GST will be an important aspect that have to be known by each and every human being of an India. So with this highlight, shall I move to the concept of GST? Then in this PowerPoint we have to be discuss or I have to be clarify the basic aspects of GST in the following aspects, that is origin, meaning, scope of GST, objectives, features, types, challenges, and finally SWOT analysis. So, this law will replace all indirect taxes levied on goods and services by the central government and state government. It came into force on April 2017. This GST can be replaced by the value added taxes at all points in the supply chain of goods and services, with the credits allowed for any tax paid or input acquired for using in making the supply. Origin of GST. The origin of goods and services have the long history. It is not a new tax regime. It is a older form of tax regime. Almost this can be followed in all developing countries 50 years ago. But in India, now only we have to be implemented, and it came into force on July 17, 2000, with the government of India set up the empowerment committee of the state finance minister with the honorable state finance ministers of West Bengal, Karnataka, Punjab, UP, Delhi members will be the following objectives. That is uniform sales tax rate, phasing out of incentive schemes, switch over to VAT, and reformation of CGST. So with this objective, the earlier indirect taxes can be revamped and it can be revalued and came into the new existence as a CG in the form of a GST. The picture now show the general meaning of a GST. GST means goods and service tax, is an indirect tax or a consumption tax levied in India on the supply of goods and services. So the GST can be replaced with all these taxes, that is luxury tax, entertainment tax, state excise duty, not excise duty, state excise duty, CST, VAT, octroi, local tax and entry tax. What is the scope of GST? GST is to cover all goods and services provided in India except alcoholic liquor for the human consumption for the levy of a goods and service tax. In other cases like petroleum and petroleum products, it has been provided that these goods shall not be subject to levy of a goods and services tax at the date of notified on the recommendation of the government. This is the scope of the GST. Next one, we shall move to the objectives. What are the Major objectives of GST. The consumption based tax instead of a manufacturing tax. Uniform GST registration by way of payment of input tax credits to eliminate the cascading effect of indirect tax on a single transaction. Subsum of all indirect taxes at center and state level. Increase the productivity. One country, one nation. Increase tax to GDP ratio and reverse surplus. Reducing economic distortion. Increasing compliances, and finally reduce tax evasion and corruption. So these are the main objectives for implementing the GST in India. Let me move to the futures. What are the futures of GST? The GST will have the two components. One is levied by central and other one is levied by the state. The rate for central and state GST would be approved appropriately, reflecting on the revenue consideration and acceptability. The central GST and state GST would be applicable to all transaction of goods and services made for the consideration except the exempted goods or services. These central CGST and SGST are to be paid in account of center and state individually. These are some extended features of the GST, right? Next one, we shall move to the types. What are the different types of GST? For the purposes of levying tax on supply of goods and services, the types can be classified. First one is Central Goods and Service Tax, that is CGST. Next one, State Goods and Service Tax, SGST. Third one, Integrated Goods and Service Tax, called as IGST. Finally, Union Territory Goods and Service Tax, to be named as UTGST. Let me explain that each category. CGST, this is the tax levied by the federal government on interstate transaction. SGST, tax levied by state government on intrastate transaction. IGST is a tax levied by the federal government on interstate transaction. UTGST is a tax levied by the federal government on inter-union territory transaction with the UTI, union territories without governing bodies. Next, we shall move to the challenges. What are the challenges of the GST? For any implementation of a new tax regime, there should be a challenges. The challenges can be made in the following aspects. First one, consent of states. For any implementation, the central government has to be concerned with the state. Second one, revenue neutral rate. It is one of the prominent factor for the success. That is, they have to be follow R&R rate. Threshold limit in GST. While achieving the broad-based tax structure under GST, both empowered committee and central government must ensure the lowering of the threshold limit should not be taxing. So they have approved, they have fixed the threshold limit. Now at present it is a 20 lakh threshold limit. Below that it is not necessary to pay the GST, to not get registered for GST. Then robust IT network by way of a GSTN, that is it is the success way for the success of GST tax regime is only through this IT network by way of the GSTN. Then extensive training to tax administration of staff. Number of enactment of statutes. For this, there will be two types of GST. One at center level called CGST and another one called state level of GST. Then there is a scope for additional levy on GST. Whenever there is a requirement, the GST Council is empowered to go for the additional levy of GST. Clubbing tax. So this is another challenges based by the GST implementation to bring all the indirect tax under the one roof. Luxury tax, entry tax, CST. So all these tax it have to be bring in under one roof. For this they will go for a clubbing of tax. So these need some challenges in implementation of GST. Statutory requirements can be adopted as per the law. Then making shifting arrangements. So for every first 5 years there are some implementation. Then third year like that they have to be withdrawn. They have to be moved to the changes in the GST tax regime. Framework for tax dispute. There has to be uniform legal procedure for a tax litigation to avoid any confusions. Defining interstate transaction. Defining interstate transaction with the transportation services available for everyone, it has to be the place of sale and consumption may not be the same. Infrastructure for the collection process. The proper infrastructures has to be designed to track the movement of your goods and services between state, collection and monitoring revenues. So these are the various changes. Then finally, the determining the GST rate. This is the major step in ensuring the success of GST, that is, arriving at the rate which are conducive to both the government and the public will be in a tough task. So, with these challenges, the GST has to be implemented and came into force and it can be followed successfully. Next, we shall move with these challenges. We will move to the SWOT of GST. So, SWOT means what? Strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat. So, in this diagram or in this chart, we will discuss what are the strength and weakness, opportunities available, and finally the threat for the GST. Strength. The following are the various strength of the implementation of GST tax, that is one nation, one tax, one market. Throughout India, the geographical area, they have followed one nation, one tax and one market. Effective tax compliances can be followed, reducing cascading effect. That is, cascading effect means what? Taxing the same event at several points. So this can be avoided. Then simplified law, the procedures can be simplified. The state and central government at a common platform. These are the strength. Weakness. When you consider the weakness, the first and the foremost thing is what? Technology, that is IT driven compliances for unaware public, heavy expenses on GST by the government, multiple tax rates, many state taxes still not submitted the subsumed into the GST. Complicated and compliance procedure will create a problem. Frequent changes in law bringing confusion, both the policymaker as well as the service provider and the service recipient. Then GST portal have not working properly then and there due to the technology issues. So these are the various weakness of the GST. Opportunity. What are the various opportunity? The opportunity is what? The transparency in government procedure, easy of doing business, reducing the tax cost, attraction for foreign investment, reducing the fight between state and center, then improve the rate of tax compliances. So these are the opportunities ahead for the policymaker to implement in the GST tax regime. Threat, what are the threat behind the GST? Dual control of both the state and central government may cause conflict of interest. Some provisions are so hard that they may increase corruptions. Some provisions disallow the credit, which ultimately increases the cost. Then multiple compliances may discourage the assess to do compliances. So these are the various threats ahead in the implementation of GST. So with this, I end of my presentation. We will back in another presentation. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.